Are you ready to explore the unknown? Dive into the world of the strange, mysterious, and unexplained with Eerie Expeditions magazine. Each issue is packed with spine-tingling tales, cutting-edge paranormal investigations, and exclusive insights into hauntings, cryptids, UFOs, and more. Whether you're a seasoned investigator or just love a good ghost story, Eerie Expeditions magazine has something for you. Join our growing community of truth seekers and adventure lovers. Subscribe today at EerieExpeditionsMagazine.com and unlock the secrets of the supernatural. Are you ready? That's EerieExpeditionsMagazine.com, where the extraordinary is just a click away. Dare to discover.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the Gateway, broadcasting from the edge of the Mojave where the strange slips through the cracks. We are live on United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM New Orleans. I'm your host this evening, C.L. Thomas. Tonight we're joined by Dennis Stone. He's the owner of America's Stonehenge in New Hampshire. And I tell you what, this guy's been on a lot of TV shows. He's done a lot of work. He's had one of my favorite people in the paranormal world. Back before the TV world kind of went, should I say it, shitty? Some of the celebrities are really shitty out there. No, this guy's worked with the real deal. So Hans Holzer, he's worked with a lot of people from the 70s. I can't wait to have him on. But before we get into that, you've been listening to Into the Night with Sean Kelly, and he just had his Christmas party, and I think I might have messed up his Christmas party just a little bit. So I went on there for just a little bit of time, and I had to leave because I had to go take a few phone calls and things like that and get ready for this show. And I accidentally hit end stream instead of leave. So my apologies to Sean. I'm so sorry that I did that. It's currently, get this guys, it's currently 57 degrees here in the Mojave. And we have right now going on outside what they call an atmospheric river. And it's supposed to last all through Christmas. So we're supposed to get a lot of heavy rains, and it has been raining pretty hard out there. It's kind of scary. There's nowhere for the water to go. So that's where it gets interesting. So I'm up on the hillside. So the only thing that can happen to me is maybe a mudslide. But for those down in the valley, particularly along the strip, you know, they have the washes and everything, and that's what those are for. But sometimes it does flood down there. So hopefully we kind of skirt past that. But it's been downpouring for at least since this afternoon. So I'm getting a little nervous. But I like when it rains here. I feel like for once I get the downtime. So I have like an excuse to stay in, to read, to write, to do, you know, normal things that you do when it snows. But anyhow, Merry Christmas to everyone out there. I was never one to really celebrate Christmas. My beliefs are a little bit different than mainstream. But I do have a few dinners planned, and actually I'm cooking for a lot of people tomorrow. And I have a show here in Vegas that I'm going to. So that's what I usually do. Eerie Expeditions magazine is coming out in January, and there's a lot of changes with that. So stay tuned for that. Right now, it is free. If you sign up online right now, the subscription is free. I'll send out the link and I'll put it on my website for those who are interested. If you're in Vegas over the next few weeks, check out my friend Ken Axel. He's got a show called Ghost Story, and it's over in Mandalay Bay, and it's 1923. It's inside the 1923 Prohibition Bar. This is rare and intimate mind reading. He does dark magic. He does like seances. It's really quite the show. It's only available from Thursdays to Sundays, and then he has another show. I think it's in a different casino. It's not at the Madeline. He's got two shows that he's doing residency, and one of them is at the one that I would go to is at Mandalay Bay. It's a really good show. Everyone knows about England's Stonehenge, but few know that America has a version of Stonehenge as well. And I kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. Some claim the site predates European settlement by thousands of years and possibly built by pre-Columbian civilization. Hans Holzer, I just ordered a book after talking to the guest a few minutes ago by Hans Holzer, and the book is called Before Columbus. I'm going to have our guest talk about that, though. Others suggest that Native American peoples may have used the site for ceremonial or astronomical purposes long before settlers arrived. The exact origin is kind of debated, but some say the structures could date back to 4,000 years ago. So what do we know about this place? The late Hans Holzer reportedly refused to talk about his Stonehenge investigations with his family, apparently because the material he uncovered was too intense for his family. He kind of kept his stuff, like we were just talking about the guest, or I was just talking to the guest before the show, and he said that Hans Holzer kind of kept all his cases away from his family anyhow, so maybe that's not something. But his reticence actually became part of the lore surrounding this site. Tonight, I welcome back Dennis Stone to the show to discuss his latest research about the site and what he believes may not have been dark at all, but rather a place for ceremonial magic around summer and winter solstices. So, Dennis, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, CL, and happy holidays to you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for coming back. I'm really excited to talk about this, but before we get into that, let me just put some people on here. You have Mark Eddy, he knows you.
Yeah, hi, Mark.
And then I got to say something to Vet here. Vet, I am so sorry that I messed up your show. I'm so sorry about that. So anyhow, Stonehenge. This site is literally right outside of your door, and you own this, and it was inherited from your father, correct?
Oh, that's correct, yeah. Yeah, it's right behind me, as a matter of fact.
Can you give us a brief overview of America's Stonehenge and its significance in the New Hampshire area?
Yeah, it's a site that's all, of course, built out of stone. It covers about 106 acres. And we're located in a town of Salem, New Hampshire, not Salem, Massachusetts. That's about 30 miles from here. And we get a lot of that during October when a lot of people come up for the Salem activities. It's pretty cool. But we're about 40 miles north of Boston. And my dad got involved with this back in the 1950s on a radio show, just like we're doing right now. I was on a Friday night, and the show was out of Boston, one of the biggest AM stations in New England. And it was a show called Yankee Yarn. So you're just sitting down about 7:30, 1955 in the summer. And he used to listen to the show quite a bit. But at this particular episode was all about these strange stone ruins located in the town of North Salem, New Hampshire. And that got him really interested. And it's a site that really shouldn't be here. And again, it covers about 106 acres. There's stone chambers, there's plaza, there's courtyard. There's all these standing stones all around the outside of the site. They look like kind of like large arrowheads for the most part, several feet tall. And these are the astronomical alignments. And then there's a whole network of underground drains. There's about 8 or 9 underground drains, some up to 60 or 70 feet long. And they actually channel the water when the snow melts in the spring and keeps the place dry. And it's all built on bedrock. And we feel that the site is a ceremonial site, not a place that people live, not kind of like the Flintstones. Some of the chambers are a little bit reminiscent of bedrock with Bonnie and Betty and all of that. But we think it's more of a ceremonial site. It's a place people probably made like a pilgrimage to, perhaps of the solstices, equinoxes, maybe when somebody was perhaps getting married or if somebody passed away. Some of the chambers do look like tombs too. There's a couple of them that look so much like some of the tombs I've seen in Ireland, for instance, and also in France. So it's a possibility it was a burial place, a place of celebration. And people would possibly live in hide or wood structures, and that's the problem. We don't know exactly where they live because whatever they lived in, probably within a couple decades of them, abandoning that structure, they just disappeared into the soil. But this site is one of about 800 sites from Quebec, Canada, and Ontario, Canada, down to about Virginia. Connecticut's loaded with these structures. Vermont is loaded. And the Hudson Valley, just north of New York City, Putnam County, Westchester, Dutchess County, and Westchester County have about 500 of these structures. They're kind of spread out, though. And that makes our site a little bit different. Our site seems to have a center to it with a high concentration of structures. And again, it has like a plaza area or courtyard area. And then it has that whole network of underground storm drains, if you will. And it has one of the features is called the sacrificial table, which is next to the largest chamber called the oracle chamber, which is a very sophisticated structure. I don't know if you have some photographs of that. We may look at some of those, but the other sites are kind of spread out. The town of North Stonington, Connecticut, we only became aware of structures in that town only 9 years ago in 2016, when a book came out called Ceremonial Stonework. And I attended a meeting in Groton, Connecticut, and that's near the Navy base in Groton, Connecticut. And there's a site there called Gunjiwamp. It's a 250-acre site with similar structures to ours. But we were at a Holiday Inn, and they had a meeting there. It's a spring meeting of the New England Antiquities Research Association. It's called NERA. My dad started the group in 1964 in our basement, and it's still going strong today. But I went to the meeting, and a gentleman spoke about his town of North Stonington, and the book was called Ceremonial Stonework again. And I looked at the book before he spoke, and I'm looking at it going 8,000 structures, 25 categories of structures, 270 photographs in the book. And I'm like, this must be the whole Northeast, maybe part of Canada. And as I looked at it a little closer, my wife's looking at it, I'm like, it says North Stonington, and it doesn't mention any other area. And I realized then it was all about North Stonington, Connecticut. And that we consider one site. And then we have a chamber next door in a town called Windham, New Hampshire, and that's one site also. But there are about 800 sites, so it could be one of the numbers could be just one chamber, or it could be like a whole complex of structures like our 106 acres, or it could be a whole town like North Stonington, Connecticut. So the site is not all by itself. And we've heard people say, well, if it's an ancient stone building culture in the Northeast, where are the other structures, And these people obviously haven't heard about the other 800 sites, They're just basically ignorant of the facts, of that.
Is there any evidence? Is there any evidence of people living in the other sites?
Let me see. I don't believe so. They do seem to be fairly clean archaeologically, and clean by that, like houseware, whether it's when they get into ceramics or stone bowls or something like stone tools, they seem to be fairly clean archaeologically, these structures. And if you lived in one of these structures, whatever you threw away and didn't, decompose over years would still be there, And that's a problem with the sites like Stonehenge in England is one of 50,000 megalithic sites in Western Europe. We've seen many of these over the years. We've traveled quite extensively over there. And that was a problem too. When they get to these sites, they seem to be fairly clean archaeologically. You don't have all these diagnostic tools, utensils, weapons. And that's because these areas may have been kind of thought of as sacred, and you didn't keep all your trash there. The archaeologists like to find junk. They like to find trash. And the areas usually where they find accumulation in the ground, they call it a midden. It's called a midden. And they just don't seem to find it with these sites over there. But now with LiDAR, and satellite imaging, thermal cameras, which we've used at our site too. We've used all of that at our site. They're starting to be able to penetrate to ground and look with ground penetration radar particularly, and find where some of these habitates are. But they were made out of hide, wood, bark, and then they may have some stone tools and some pottery, so there was something going on there, but the structure itself is long ago dissolved, and that makes it kind of a problem, But they are starting to find some of the villages over there, and all you find is some of the archaeological remains of tools, utensils, weapons, fire pits. Sometimes they find burial sites too, but they are starting to find where the people lived that built some of these megalithic sites like Stonehenge. In our area here, it's been really built up since the 1960s. A lot of homes have gone up, and our feeling is now some of our neighbors' houses could be sitting on some of the habitat sites. And it's kind of hard to go into somebody's yard and dig it up now. You just can't do that, which is really, really grew, And so that kind of window kind of left us with all this modern technology. If we had this technology decades and decades, maybe, 100 years ago, when the first research began on our site, actually 90 years ago in 1937, they might have been able to go into some of these it was all a lot of farmland around here, and they might have asked some of the owners, hey, can we go out here with a ground penetration radar and, scope out the place, kind of thing. But again, I don't think it's a village. I think our site was used certain times of the year for certain activities. And if you turned in the news the other day, you saw all the people at Stonehenge. They must have had a few thousand there for the winter solstice.
Yeah,
I had it on my YouTube.
I saw some of the ceremonies from that.
it was just a mass of humanity there. We didn't have that mass, but in summer we've had up to 1,000 people at our site when the weather's good. But in the wintertime, obviously the numbers it was in the 20s and we have fewer. But we did have a nice turnout for the kind of weather we had in the winter solstice. But
Is it
today
how does these how does this site compare to the monoliths in England, and how is it different than what maybe do we think it's a different culture than the Native Americans?
Yeah, that's $1 million question. Native Americans have been in New Hampshire now, the New Hampshire Archaeological Society. My dad was a member of that. My uncle was a vice president of that society. And in recent years, in the last decade or so, they found evidence of 13,000-year-old human activity in New Hampshire, about 90 miles west of here near Vermont on the Connecticut River. In that area, they found 13,000-year-old evidence. So we have to think that whoever were involved with this site, we have to look at Native Americans because they've been here for thousands and thousands of years. It doesn't seem, if you talk to mainstream archaeologists, they say that if it's pre-colonial, so it's time before our European settlers came in after 1492 in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and all of that, that you don't find any stonework before that in New England. They were saying Native Americans didn't get involved because they did make stone tools, utensils, and weapons, but they weren't building big stone structures, if you will. And that might be incorrect, but you'll still encounter that today. And we have talked to a couple Native Americans. One of them actually was on the Holzer Files, that show. And he's part of the Wampanoag Nation down near Plymouth, Massachusetts, south of Boston area, the greater area. And I think the Providence, kind of in Rhode Island, that whole area is Wampanoag. And then it gets into the Narragansett and then the Pequot Indians. But he says he visited our site about 10 years ago, and then he was back 5 years ago for that. He said, I don't feel it was my ancestry, and I think he was talking about his oral tradition too, the oral tradition that's passed down, that they were building these stone structures in the Northeast, I think, and I've talked to him in person. And when he came back to the Holzer Files, he had an episode 10 years ago when he was on the site. He actually fell on the ground, and he was all stressed out and everything. He says to the production company, I'm not going to go back on the site. The site is beautiful, it's wonderful, but there's something with it does not agree with me. So they filmed him out back of our visitor center during the evening, and I had a lot of chance to really talk with him and everything. And then there's another lady, Paula Underwood. She was from California. She grew up there, but her ancestors were Iroquois. They came from the Great Lakes area in New York and maybe out towards Michigan. And she also did 10,000 years of oral tradition. Her dad taught her, and she had to repeat it a couple different ways so she had the story straight. And the book she wrote was called The Walking People. About 30 years ago, she wrote the book. And she visited us twice from the West Coast, and she had a prayer circle in our theater. But she goes, in the book, she goes, I grew up not knowing about any of these stone structures all over the Northeast, including your site. But it does talk in my oral tradition about these people that built these stone structures on the hills. They were unusual, probably in New York, because that's where a lot of these are too. Maybe that's where her people were kind of living in that area. Albany, and maybe a little bit further west. And that's where some of these structures are. And she goes, when we talk about these stone structures and these hill people, they were different. They weren't our people, and they're building these strange structures. She goes, I had no idea what this oral tradition was talking about until I learned about the structures in the Northeast, including our site. She goes, it all made sense. She goes, but it wasn't our. So that's something from the Native Americans. But
interesting. So do you think that it might have been, is it possible that maybe the Viking culture or the Druid culture, somebody that was involved in the Stonehenge in England, somehow made it to America to build that?
We know the Vikings are up in Canada 1,000 years ago. In our site, we have both carbon. We have 17 carbon datings now on our site since 1967, and we have optically stimulated luminescence dating we've done in the last 5 years since 2020. And those results are pre-colonial dates on our site going back as early as, I think you mentioned earlier, 4,000 years. So it would predate the Viking era. The Vikings came into Lonzo Meadow, Canada. We visited that site 2 years ago. We got all the way up at the Newfoundland. It was pretty amazing. In fact, they just did a radio show out of Newfoundland a couple of days ago. But they made it, they were there for, they think now, once the Viking period ended in 1050 AD, they became Christianized. Leif Erikson became Christianized. His mom did, but his dad, Eric the Red, would have nothing to do with that. But that era of Viking, which ran from around I'm going to say roughly 700 AD up to about 1050, almost 300 years of the Viking period, they became the Greenlanders, the Icelandic people, and also they were coming in from Greenland for the next 400 years into the 1400s when they say a little ice age took place, and the Greenlanders, a bishop went up there to collect a tithe around 14, they give a date, 14 something, and they're all gone. I learned going to Iceland that Iceland is a much warmer place than Greenland because it has the Gulf Stream. And Iceland and Greenland doesn't get that. So during the Little Ice Age, they suffered. They think that the Greenlanders, after 400 years, are coming back to this country and trading goods. And they may have gone further out west in Lonzo Meadow, which is a thought. They might have moved into, they might have come here to settle in the New World. But the Druids would be a later time too. The Druids were around a little bit later than the 4,000-year-old. They were part of the Celtic culture, and they would be a little bit late too. But the megalithic builders of Western Europe, they go from the Neolithic, the New Stone Age, into the Bronze Age. And the Bronze Age seems to change the culture. That's when they stopped, seems like they stopped building all these incredible stone structures all over Western Europe, and actually to Malta. We've been to Malta too. And then you can go further east towards Göbekli Tepe, which is a much earlier site. They seem to change, and they maybe became more like building forts. These structures don't seem to be forts, they seem to be religious centers, But that's a great question. Is our site and some of the other sites influenced by old world visitors? And perhaps they assimilated with Native Americans. So our site looks so many features look like size, shape, and the orientation is very important of how they're orientated out of true north, just like the ones on the other side. Like our V hut looks like a wedge tomb of Ireland. We've been to Ireland. And I was just looking up some today, and they come in different sizes, and they do come in different shapes, but they always face southwest. And my dad and I were there in 1983, and we saw a couple that looked just like ours, like a V shape or wedge shape. And it had the same kind of roof on it, and it was facing southwest. And our V hut is the only structure on our site that faces the southwest. Everything is north, south, east, and west. And next to the V hut is a structure that runs kind of a lodge, kind of a rectangular structure. It looks like the galley or gallery graves. And these gallery graves are in northwest Ireland, which we didn't get to, but in France. I've seen them in France. And in Holland, they call them the Giant's Bed, the hidden bin, and they were used for burial tombs. And these others were used for burial tombs. So next to our V hut, we have another structure that resembles so strongly, it runs exactly true east and west out of true north. It runs about 30 feet. And the ones in Europe run roughly 20 to 30 feet in length. They do vary a little bit in the length. And you see it and you go like, wow, this is just like you see in France, or if you were in Holland. And in Spain has very similar ones too, the west coast of Spain. I've been to Spain, all around part of Spain, Madrid, and down to the Gibraltar, but I didn't get to the west coast, and that's where some of the coolest megalithic sites are, and they go right into Portugal. That's an area I still got to get back to. I've seen a lot of photographs. So the architecture looks so much like Western European sites. So the Native American thing, I think that's really something we have to really look at. It'd be a very ancient culture of Native Americans, and it could be so many thousands of years ago that some of this, some of this just didn't pass down to, say, modern Native Americans. Some of the oral tradition, because we know in the going into the 1600s, about 90% of the Native Americans in the New England area, they say they either got hepatitis B or they got smallpox. I think it's hepatitis B, and a lot of information was lost. So I'm not trying to jump around the answer. We just really don't, after 70 years, we really don't know. But we have found a wigwam site 30 feet across, and we have 3 carbon datings from that area. It was a 30-foot wigwam near our parking lot, and a cooking rack across the parking lot. These all found in the 1990s and carbon dated. Well, that's a a picture near the oracle chamber. The oracle chamber is not in the frame. It's to the left, and that's the biggest structure still on the site. But that monolith right there is a little different. Most of our astronomical alignments, the stones kind of look like that monolith right in the center of the picture there with the sun over it, but they're freestanding and they're about 500 or 600 feet from the main site. This is really close to the entrance of the oracle chamber. It is a structure you can't see in the picture. It's behind where we took the picture. And if you go to one corner of a wall, you watch the winter solstice. If you go to the next corner of the next wall supporting this 28,000 pound roof slab right behind where I took the picture, you'll see the equinox for spring and fall. And if you go to the corner of the next wall to the right, going to your right in the thing, you'll see the summer solstice over that same stone. And it looks just like the winter solstice. There's a little cupule, a little kind of a V shape on top of that monolith. And the sun actually in that picture right there is actually rising over that. So that's one of the 57 alignments that we know of at the site today. But it's a little different. It's not a freestanding stone as part of a wall, and it's not hundreds of feet away. That makes for a more accurate alignment. It's almost like the priest had his own little observation right there, for the four seasons, if you will,
Now, do these stones have any kind of markings on them of how they would have moved them?
Well, yeah, these slabs like that and any flat slabs you can see in the picture are basically taken off the bedrock. The whole hill is bedrock. It's granite. It does come up in layers. They say it's foliated, so it's like an onion and you can peel off the layers. And these ancient people did that, and they made roof slabs, wall slabs, monoliths like that one there. That's a small monolith. Some of the monoliths go up to 14 feet in length. And some of the roof slabs go up to, like I mentioned, 14 tons. So they were actually peeling off the bedrock, making a lot of stonework. And in this picture, you can see the rounded kind of rocks. Those are left there by the glaciers. Those are something that was left by nature. And that's what New England farm walls kind of look like. But our walls have not only these rounded rocks, but a lot of flat slab work, which makes them look different than farmers' walls. Farmers' walls were built starting, well, some went back to the 1600s, but the classic area of New England farm walls is about 1750 up to about 1850, roughly. Before that, they built wooden fences in New England. Like you go to the Plymouth Plantation and you go to some of the other historic sites, I think even Sturbridge, 1820. They had some stonework, but they used a lot of wooden fences. And then later they used a lot of stones because they wanted to clear the fields of the stones so you didn't hit them when you plow. And they made boundaries, stock fences, and they cleared the fields out. And they did it for about 100 years. And we have 240,000 miles of historic farmers' walls in New England. But we have walls here that are shaped like serpents, head, body, and tail. That's new since 2016. North Stonington, Connecticut, I mentioned earlier, one of the categories is the serpent walls. And there's 400 serpent walls from 30 feet up to 300 feet in North Stonington, Connecticut alone. They go into Rhode Island, and they go into Gunchewamp, I mentioned earlier, which is about 10 miles west of North Stonington, roughly. They're in Kentucky. They're in the Hudson Valley, which all of this is new since 2016. Before that, we wouldn't even be, except for the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, which we've been to, which is 1,350 feet long. That's an amazing.
That one's neat. That one's really
neat.
That's
cool. It is. It is made out of earth. It is sitting on a stone platform. But we're talking about stone walls that are shaped like snakes. And I think both are really important. I think they're cool. But the big thing is there are probably thousands of them. They go all the way out to Weed, California by Mount Shasta. They're in Winnipeg, Canada, and Parks Canada's working on theirs. I met the couple that drove to New Hampshire because a woman's sister moved to New Hampshire. So they drove all the way up from Winnipeg, visited us, told us about her turtle effigies and her serpent. I said, I didn't know that. I mean, I was kind of shocked. And she goes, yeah, Parks Canada is actually working with them on that. And I think that's really important. You got a government agency actually taking them seriously. South of the border in the United States, I don't know who's taking these things seriously, It's like our site, we don't, where's the National Geographic? Where's the Smithsonian, on all of this, They're very quiet on this,
Well, Dennis, I want to show this other one that you sent, this one here. What is this?
Yeah, that's the winter solstice monolith. And that was taken on Saturday evening. I was up there getting firewood and I was bringing that home, and I know it was a cloudy day on Saturday. It was kind of not too nice of a day, and it was cold. And as I was heading home, I'm like, the clouds, I'm not going to see anything. And all of a sudden I could see them potting, and I was about 600 or 700 feet from where that is. And I dropped my cart of wood, took my ATV, ran over there. Nobody else was on the hill. I was up there the day before the solstice, and I saw that, and it was really pretty. It came out beautiful. So I took a couple pictures of that before I headed home, So that was Saturday.
And what is that in the picture? What is that? Is that one of the monoglyphs?
That's one of the monoliths. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Right. And that's one of many that surround the site, from sunrise, sunset, moonrise, moonset, and also star alignments in the true north alignment. And they look kind of like an arrowhead, if you can see that. I don't know if there's another picture
Yeah,
of
they
that there
do.
too.
About how
Yeah.
tall is that?
That one there is probably, see, a couple feet of it's underground, buried. So that stone's probably about 6 or 7 feet, because they have used ground penetration radar. And that particular stone, they did an excavation about 1974 in front of it, and they went down a couple feet. So the stones aren't huge like Stonehenge, but they vary from several feet up to the biggest we have is about 14-foot monolith. And that one fell over and broke in 3 pieces. But this one here has always been standing. Yeah, and that's looking southwest actually. We have the summer solstice sunset. It's still standing, and it looks just like that. And that summer solstice stone is probably about 700 feet from that stone. They both look the same, and the sun moves through that whole range during the course of 6 months, back and forth. It's people don't appreciate it till they see an astronomical sight like ours and think, oh my gosh, the sun really moves a great distance for sunrise and sunset. Like here's winter way over here, here's summer, and then in the middle is equinox. But we have the cross quarter days too. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're like November 1st, August 1st, February 1st. They're called the cross quarter days or the mid-season days, and some of them are like All Saints Day, right around Candlemas, or Groundhog's Day is another one. Some of our modern, customs or holidays are actually based on ancient ones. And what the ancients did at our site and other sites too is they divided the year into 8 parts. And these cross quarter days are actually the beginning of the season. So we have like the May Day alignment, and that was considered by some ancients as to be the beginning of summer. Today we say summer solstice is the first day of summer, but also you can see where it says midsummer solstice or midwinter solstice. You're like, wait a minute, if it's mid, how come it's the first day?
St. John's
Because
Eve.
the cross quarter days were actually the beginning. August 1st would be the end of summer, beginning of fall. Then you have fall in September 21st. Then you'd have the November 1st, which is, the Celts called it Samhain. It looks like Samhain, and it's All Saints Day today, right after Halloween. And then you go the beginning. That's the beginning of winter, November 1st. And then you have the midwinter, December 21st or 20th. And the end of winter is February 1st, right around Groundhog's Day and Candlemas. It's called Imbolc by the Celts. And then you get into, spring equinox. So there's actually 8 parts of the year, and you'd have 8 different parts for the sunrise and 8 parts for the sunset. And our site has those, which is kind of cool.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
You kind of see this kind of stuff all over the world, actually, in different cultures.
Definitely, yeah.
So there's got to be some kind of connection between them.
I think people are traveling further and trading things further, not only across like North America, but people were, on boats much earlier and went further than we used to think they did, We used to kind of look back at people as being more simpleton and unable to do things, and certainly not sailors that went across the Atlantic or the Pacific. But we know the Polynesians traveled great distances, across the Easter Island to Hawaii in ancient times. They were great navigators on the Pacific side, and the Vikings did that on the Atlantic side. And they say the Irish Chaldean monks actually were ahead to trying to escape Viking persecution. They say that the Irish Chaldean monks were in Iceland and Greenland before the Vikings got there. They're trying to stay away from them, and they kept getting pushed further west, So, there's some pretty good navigators and boat builders back then. So maybe people were exchanging things. Not everything's a coincidence. You might have structures that look the same on both sides of the ocean. Some people say it's isolationism. It's coincidental. Other people say no, diffusion was going on. People's ideas and stuff were crossing the ocean, and that's why they look similar. There was an exchange. There's a battle going on that way.
Right.
No Explorers Before Columbus is one of them, by Samuel Eliot Morison from Harvard. And he had a battle 90 years ago going on. And he was a great Harvard historian. He wrote Admiral of the Ocean Sea about Columbus, European Discovery of America. But he said, yeah, there's nobody that came over before Columbus. And yet he died in 76. And Lonzo Meadow was discovered in 60. By 64, they had conclusive evidence the Vikings had been here 500 years before the Vikings to North America. And yet he still said, well, it wasn't of any real consequence. And then he died in 76. It's like that kind of attitude, you know. Now, that window there is really cool. That's one of our windows. And that was a new find in 2016. We started finding these stone walls had these beautiful windows like some of the chambers have on the main site. We knew about those. But in the stone walls, we didn't realize that there were actually windows, some near the ground, some higher up, and some have like two sets, have four windows close to each other. Like there's like four of them, and they're tight together. We have two sets of that. But that picture I found 5 years ago, and I was astonished. I looked at that. It was 1970, November. My dad did the writing on the slide. It's a slide, actually. It's a covered slide. And he wrote on the slide, portal. And then he wrote on the envelope he stuck it in, the date, and then he said portal, looking at the winter solstice. Because if in the very background is that winter solstice one. It looks so small there, because of the way the picture's taken. And it's about 600 feet beyond that. I saw that. I'm like, what is this? I know that area, but there's no window there. This is 2020. So I took that envelope, I put the slide back in it, I put it in a safe place, and I lost it for 5 years. And in March, I found it again, going through all my dad's slides and all those photographs, getting everything organized. And we digitized it took 3 years to digitize all his files. So those pictures and slides were the last thing that we were going to do. And I found it. And I opened the envelope, I pulled out the slide, and went, oh my God, there it is. And we went down, we put it in a Kodak scanner, we put it on the computer, I took a picture of my camera, I ran up and I went to the area where it looks like this window should be, and I couldn't find anything. And everything looked wrong, compared to what I was looking at. I went down to my manager, James, he's really good in the tech stuff. I said, James, there's something wrong with this. It doesn't match up. And I said, I can't find anything. This is really weird. And he's looking at the winter solstice. He actually blew it up so you can see the winter solstice. And there's actually a person standing next to it. You can't see it because it's so small. But if you blow it up, you can see the person. He realized we have a beautiful 5-year-old picture of that winter solstice. And he's looking back and forth. He goes, we got the thing. We scanned it backwards. So he flipped it on the computer. I took another picture, ran up there. In 5 minutes, I found the remains. And you had that slide up there a few minutes ago. The two top stones, actually, somebody either knocked them off after November of 1970, or it was like a tree fell. There it is right there. That's what I found. And I'm like, oh my God, that's it. After 55 years, we found it. And that's a pentagonal shaped window. It has 5 sides. And so I didn't see the two stones on top. I couldn't find them initially. So we brought in ground penetration radar, the latest Doria from Radar Solutions International out of Concord, Mass. She was up doing a lot of work 5 years ago, and then she came back in April. She goes, I'll see if I can find these stones for you. They should be pretty shallow. So she laid out a whole grid of flags on both sides of the wall, and we did all. It took a while to set that up, scan, and about a week later, she had a conference call because she's probably about an hour away from us, so she just did it. It was great. We did a Zoom call. Anyway, she's going through all her data, and we're looking at the screen, and she goes, I think these are your two stones. And they're pretty shallow. They just have a little bit of soil on them. So we did an excavation in July, and we found the two stones. So it's actually a 5-sided window. Most of them are actually rectangular. Some of the windows have stone shutters. Some have Venetian blind shutters. And I think 4 or 5 of them have cobbles, these stone cobbles. They like a big softball size, and they're actually inside the windows, and it makes it kind of hard to see through them. So my dad used to look at these windows starting in 1955. Other researchers did. And up to the time my dad passed away in 2009, he was actually out on one of the ATVs with Dr. Winkler from Penn State, an archaeoastronomer, looking at the walls, making diagrams. Really, and I was on the road flying a lot. And he'd tell me when I was at a hotel, he goes, yeah, Dr. Winkler was up there looking at the walls. Are so fascinating here. They turn, they twist, they bend. They got big slabs of stone, but they never saw the windows. And today we have 36 windows as of right now all over the hilltop. These beautiful windows, and you can't miss them now. You know what I mean? I have no idea why they didn't reveal themselves decades ago to us, but they're absolutely beautiful. And the pentagonal one was probably one of the coolest ones, but it fell apart. You know, the others are still intact.
Now, when you call them a portal, do you mean people are contacting other worlds through these things?
Well, that's the thing. When I first saw my first one, I started thinking like spirit window. You know, I'm thinking this has nothing to do with the farmer. You know, and why would they do this? You know, and somewhere near the ground, as I mentioned, some are higher up in the wall, and they have a beautiful lintel. They have a sill plate, and they have nice sides, and these are definitely intended. They're not just like a hole in the wall. You know, these are intended. Well, I got a friend that lives in England. She lives right by Avebury, and she does a lot of spiritual stuff. She's a dowser. She's an archaeologist, and her dad visited us in 1980, as a matter of fact, and wrote us up in a book. And she visited us for the first time in May, and she came over here and she did a 2-day workshop, and she had people. She does kind of like tours to Egypt, tours to Malta, which we've been to Malta. She does tours all around her area of England, and then she's been Sedona. She goes to Chaco Canyon, bringing tours. But she
always wanted to go to Chaco Canyon.
Yeah, we've been there. It's beautiful. And I said, gee, I wish I could catch it. I want to go back there. I've been 5 years, but I said, Maria, and her name is Maria. I said, Maria, I want to go. We didn't have the opportunity though to get back out there with her when she came. In fact, she came in last year too, about a little over a year ago, and she was actually flown from her. She had to get to Heathrow to Boston, and she went up to Vermont on a bus. And a gentleman up there is one of these structures. It's called the Woodstock Calendar 1. I'll make sure it's Calendar 2, I think it is, in Woodstock, Vermont. There's a Calendar 1 up in Royalton near the Joseph Smith property. But she went up there, and the gentleman owns that, and he owns a lot of property up there. And he actually brought her over here to do some of her investigation. And a lot of it has to do with dowsing rods, ley lines, that kind of thing. But I've done a couple podcasts with her over the last 6 or 7 years, besides her coming in and meeting us and everything this year. And after one of them, she goes, Dennis, stay on the line. I got to show you something. And at that time, she had a new book coming out. She didn't want to put it on the air. And what it was is Dartmoor, England. And she's showing me the windows they have there. And she goes, these are called soul holes. She goes, the feeling is by ancients from what we know. And because it's prehistory, so, I mean, how can you be totally sure?
Right.
But the tradition is that this is where the spirits would flow through. And also, she said, in some cases, when she's dowsing, they're portals, like energy. And I don't know if there's any difference between a spirit going through and energy being detected. I got to talk to her more about that. But she goes, we call them soul holes, and these are ancient. Dartmoor, these walls are megalithic. These are thousands of years old, like what we have, like we believe, And she goes, I think that these are, portals of energy, or the spirits can flow through. Probably about 8 years ago, I did a radio show out of Indiana, and a woman was a doctor, and she did mostly medical shows. She goes, I'm going to get into something a little different. And I was her first person to do something odd away from medicine. And I was talking about these windows. She goes, what's interesting? She goes, I was in Dallas as a nurse before, and I was there, and I'd be asked by the family to come in and unlock the windows. The patient's windows were all locked, for safety. And she goes, I'd unlock it when the person was passing, so that the soul could go through the window. And I said, that sounds like what we have in a modern day, the same idea. And I said, that's interesting. And I mentioned that to my wife, and my wife grew up Catholic, and she goes, yes, I've heard of that. And I think half the people that visit us have heard of that, and other people say, no, I never heard of that before. But I saw a TV show the other day, and I was watching. I wish I had my camera to record it. They actually did that on this, whatever this program was. They opened the window when the person was passing, so the spirit could go out the window. And these windows might be something like that,
It does make kind of sense. It does make sense, because in some cultures you cover the mirrors when somebody dies.
Right. Okay. And I know in Egypt they have the barakar, and they have those false frames. We can't go through them as mortals because they're solid with a frame. But they say that the spirit, I don't know if something like that might be something similar, we're still learning about it, still learning. But I think that's something like that.
Have you had any personal experiences there?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. I have a lot of friends who are in the paranormal, and we've had a lot of paranormal investigators besides Hans Holzer. And we have the Seacoast Paranormal Group that comes over there about 20 miles from here. And they actually had their own show, and I've been on that too, on TV and stuff. But what I've heard is children up there. I was walking up my dog last year going from here up a pathway up to the summer solstice, which is about 800 feet from here, and it's a big open area going up towards the monolith. And then it's about another 400 feet to the main site where you actually stood to watch the sunset. I'm going in the reverse. I'm heading kind of like southeast. And as I'm walking up the hill towards the stone, it's all bedrock, and I'm going up over this ridge. I can hear kids, and it's after hours, and I'm like, nobody should be here. You have to come in, go to the visitor center. You have to pay an admission, get a map, during business hours. So there should not be anybody up there. And we've had some vandalism in the past, so that on my mind when I get up there. But they sounded like little kids, And I had my dog with me, and she barks at everything. She's a Nova Scotia duck-tailed retriever. She's my buddy. So we go up there and we walk the hill every night. And she did not react whatsoever. I'm like, why isn't she going nuts? She does go nuts. If she sees a deer, a rabbit, she won't attack them, but she just goes nuts, Or a person up there, like my neighbors walk their dogs up there too, which is nice. They keep an eye, and if she sees them, she'll let out a couple of barks and then run over and say hi. And as I got towards the top of the hill, I heard more of that. I'm like, now what am I going to do? Now, these kids are causing damage. What are they doing up here? It's a liability too. These kids should know, because we have it all. It's 106 acres, but the neighbors are pretty nice. Most neighbors are very respectful, and the ones that we know real well, we let them go up there at night, keep an eye on the place, which is good, for safety, and because like I say, we had some bad vandalism in the past. And I get to the top, right near the summer solstice monolith. I'm standing there, and you can see hundreds of feet all around you. I'm like, okay, where are those kids? They must have gone into the main site. Maybe they're in the oracle chamber. I'm still kind of mad because these kids should not be up there. It's kind of disrespectful. Kids are kids, though. We were all kids at one time too. So, and I go and I heard it one more time, and then I go to the site. As I approached the stone, I heard it one more time, and I said they should be right in front of me now, and nothing. And my dog, again, her name is Sky. She didn't do anything. So I get into the main site, and I get down to the oracle chamber, and I'm expecting to be hit over the head with something, I don't know. And I get in there, there's nobody there. And then I walk into another structure called the Patty Chamber. There's a couple other, like the East-West Chamber. Absolutely nothing. And one of the paranormal ladies I mentioned, her name is Lynn. She's had things at night up there with other investigators and events. And she's been up there several times. And actually, she's interviewed me up there too, as well as in the studio. And she goes, Dennis, I've heard children up there. And then when she said, when she told me that and what I heard, I got goosebumps. Of like, yeah. These kids should have been right there in front of me. They should. As I came over the hill, they should have been right there. So I've heard a couple other things like that. I heard a couple talking up there. And again, this is after hours, and nobody. I'm like listening, and I'm hearing what sounds like a girl talking very softly, in kind of a guy's voice. And I'm like, oh, great. Somebody up here, they're trespassing. They're, basically they're not paying their admission, and they shouldn't be here, really. It's like Stonehenge. They have hours of operation, then you're not supposed to be there,
right.
Wherever. Any place in the world, any business. Yeah, and I'm like, and I walked around, all around, not a sign of anybody. So I don't know what to say about that. I wish I had at that time, had somebody like Lynn with me, or somebody else like Hans Holzer, if he was still around, just to see what their response, how they would respond to that, So those are mine. They're not really huge, but they really kind of got to me, I don't know.
When you had Hans Holzer, there was a lady, medium, a very famous medium named Ethel.
Yeah, Ethel Myers.
Did a seance?
Yeah.
She did a seance, right? What did she find?
Well, she came up, November 12th, 1974, because before that year, he had brought up Nancy Abel and Ingrid Beckman, who was kind of new in it, and he had really high hopes for her. She might have done very well. And I think they all flew out of New York City. I'm not sure where they all lived, but Hans lived in New York City. That would be in the book called Long Before Columbus, and it came out on Columbus 500th anniversary in 1992. And Hans started with us in 1970. He even went to one of the country clubs up in Derry, and we had dinner together. We got those slides, although the slides have all faded. I showed them to Alexandra's daughter.
Is this one?
Well, those were actually taken by Hans. And those are actually Wicca from New York, and that's 1971.
Okay. Yeah, I'm getting them confused here.
Yeah, and I think the back... Yeah, but those are Hans Holz's pictures, and the back side, if you could flip them, I don't usually I send it out with the backside, a picture of that. I don't know if I did that with you. If I didn't, I
Oh,
apologize.
I didn't
But
upload that. I'll try to find it
okay.
as you're
Yeah,
telling.
I didn't. Yeah, and I think there was one of the, we had a couple of them. In fact, two of them stayed at our house one night and scared my sister because one stayed in our cellar, which was kind of finished, and the other one stayed upstairs. And my sister got up to, the restroom in the middle of the night. Her name was Kathy. You saw them, and I think one was Mary, and she was one Wicker group, and the other one was a different group. And she saw them glaring at each other, one at the bottom of the stairs and one at the top. And my sister never forgot that, whatever that means or whatever that was. But they actually stayed at our home up in Derry, New Hampshire. But Hans was there during that apparently, and I had forgotten that. I know he was here in 70 and 70, but I didn't know he was here. That they're doing that little ceremony, and that's the plaza area I mentioned earlier. And I can't make out all the people in it, but yeah, they were doing a ceremony. You might have like a book they're looking at and all of that. So yeah, that's one of Hans Holtz's. He took those two pictures there. Yeah.
So when Ethel was there, did she come up with anything?
Yeah, talking about I heard the other two were talking about the builders. Just trying to describe what the people, the complexion, how tall they were, and a little bit more than that, what they were doing up there. And if you do get the book, it will go into more detail. And again, it's long before
I
Columbus.
I got it.
Oh, and then you can actually look and see what she says, because I read it when my new book came out in last year, a year and a half ago, in the spring equinox of 2024. So I did so much reading over the years of different books I had already read years ago. I said, I got to go back and read all of these books, Goodwin's book from 1946 about our site, and all these different books, because I wanted to put a lot of that in my book. And I read Hans' book, and I would say about 3 years ago. So some of the details I don't remember, but Ingrid Beckman, Nancy Abel, if you look at what they say about the people and, maybe where they kind of came from and what they used the site for, I think you'll see that in that book, in Hans's book. That's a great book, because some of the stuff could have got lost, if he hadn't recorded that, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
He's one of those investigators I wish was still around. We need more people like that. Nowadays, people are just too concerned about fame, and they're really missing the big picture.
No, he was just a total investigator. Yeah, his daughter told me how many different, I guess 8mm, probably super 8mm films he did, also audio recordings, and when he had, Ethel Myers there, that's when Betty Hill, and she was part of the Betty and Betty Hill abduction in 1961. And that's one of the most famous cases ever. She must have saw that Hans, probably in a newspaper article, one of the New Hampshire newspapers, that he was coming to town, and it's one of his many visits at our site. So she made her way over in 1974, and then November 12th, and we got pictures of her with her alien head, and Ethel and Hans and a lot of other. There was a pretty big entourage, because he was pretty well known, And one of my girlfriend's parents, she wasn't a girlfriend at the time. They came over, and then I met her and became a girlfriend for a little while, because I guess the newspapers picked up on this. They didn't have the internet back then. But Betty Hill came in, and she wanted to get a reading from Ethel Myers. And I asked the daughter, maybe that's there. And I think a lot of people involved with UFOs would love to hear the results of that. So last time I talked to Alexandra, she said, I'll keep an eye open for it. So apparently she hasn't found it yet, if there is one.
Is there any UFO connection to the site?
We have seen, about last year we saw, I was coming home on ATV, and I saw what looked like a fuselage of a plane. And I flew for 42 years. I flew about 30,000 years, turboprops, small planes, and jets, and I ended up at UPS flying the 727s. And so I'm pretty, an American too, flying jets. So this thing was in the sky. It was shiny. I saw no wings. I saw no tail. It was up pretty high. I'd say probably, 10,000 feet, just, from my experience. And I'm watching it. I'm doing stuff on my ATV, picking up firewood, as I always do when I come home for our 2 wood stoves, cleaning up the whole hilltop. And I'm looking up like, that thing should be moving along. If it's above 10, you can go over 250 knots. Below 10,000, the speed limit's 250. That's still almost 300 miles per hour, 280 of them. I'm like, that thing isn't moving. I know winds can affect your ground speed. And I went back to doing my stuff. I looked up there a couple of minutes later. I'm like, that dang thing hasn't moved, and it should be like, jets moving right along the sky. So then I got on my TV, I drove, and I got underneath some trees, and then I broke out from the trees, looked up again, and there's it's still up there. I'm like, now that's not normal. That's not a blimp. It's not a helicopter. And all I see is I don't see wings. All I see is that fuselage shape, cigar shape. And I'm looking at it. And so I decided to keep going further towards home. And I got back into the woods where I couldn't see above. And then I finally broke out closer to my house, and then it was gone. The day before that, my daughter lives next door to us. My daughter-in-law, she was out walking her little beagle Lily late at night. And she looked up over the hill, and she saw, and she described, I wish she was here to describe it because I'm missing some of the details. It was just like the day before. She sees this stuff at night, a light. She thought it was a plane initially. But then she goes, and then she watched it, and the colors were wrong. There's red, the navigational lights are, like just exactly like on a boat. They're red, left, green, and then white tail. Strobe lights, rotating big. And she says, now her brother is a pilot. He has a helicopter license, and he has his own airplane, and he works for Scale Composites in the desert out in the Mojave Desert, actually. In fact, he's in town so he's in aeronautics. He went there. So they kind of an aviation family too on that side. And she goes, my God, that thing, it just really, she's not into UFOs. And she goes, this thing, I've never seen anything like this. And our neighbor, who was doing all the digitizing of my dad's files for 3 years, that's what we hired her for. She's retired. Her brother worked for us from 70 to 74. He probably met Hans Holzer. So here we are 50-something years later, and we have a sister working for us. She used to have her own limo business, and she used to have her own tire business, and she was in computers. But she lives next to us. We put her to work scanning stuff. She was looking at her house the day before that at night, got up to get a glass of water in the kitchen, and her house is on this right around the corner from me, about a mile. But her house, that's our property too. She's looking south. She sees over the site where she thought was the moon, and then she looks to the right and she sees the moon. So she's like, oh my God, and that was the day before my daughter saw her thing at night, and the day before I saw my thing in the sky. The other thing we had was a girl came in with her mom, and I wish I had this video. It was on our computer, and then we lost it. She actually filmed a cube. Her mom was driving. She filmed the cube. As she was coming in to visit us, she kind of go around. There's a couple ways to approach us. And as they drove around the around the road, kind of a circular road, she's watching this thing over the site, and she's filming it, and sent it to us. And it's actually a cube over the hill.
That's so.
And we lost it, unfortunately.
Man.
I wish she would come back But Betty Hill's whole thing took place in northern New Hampshire, but the incident at Exeter was 1965, and they have the Exeter UFO Fest every fall, and big names in UFO come out to speak. And it's about Betty's experience, although that was about 80 miles north, but she lived in Kingston, New Hampshire, right next to Exeter. That's where she grew up. But the incident at Exeter happened right there, so they do a big, like they do down in, we've been to the one out in New Mexico.
We are just out of time, Dennis. Can you tell me quick how they can visit your site? Just real quick.
Yeah. Thank you so much again. Yeah. The hour went by really fast. It's StonehengeUSA.com. And then if you go on there, there's a complete 11-minute video you can watch that we show in the theater. There's also a free app download. You download the app, you can do a complete virtual tour of our site for free in your couch. And if you come there, you can use it because it talks to you, pictures and text. It's kind of cool. And we have events coming up and everything. We're on, we do a lot of YouTube videos and all of that. But StonehengeUSA.com is really the way to do it. And if they want to call us or leave us a message, we'll get back to them. And we're open every day but Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Dennis, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I just love having you on.
Oh, thank you so much, Theo. Maybe next time we'll talk to you. We'll have some more things. Actually, we have a canoe. We just got a carbon dating back last week on this canoe that's been in our collection, a dugout wooden canoe. Maybe we'll talk about that next time. We're so excited.
Yes, I would love to. Yes. You've been listening to The Gateway, broadcast from the edge of the Mojave where the strange slips through the cracks, live from United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM New Orleans. My guest tonight was Dennis Stone, owner of America's Stonehenge. You can find him at American Stonehenge, USAmericanStonehenge.org. If you've missed a show, subscribe to my channel. To stay abreast on the latest radio interviews and paranormal adventures, the link to the channel can be found from my website, clthomas.org. Until next time, and Merry Christmas, everyone.